All mosquito control. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Hey, folks. Good to see. Good to have you on. Well, we'll be starting in a little bit. Just gotta wait for a couple more people to come on. Hey, we just got a third viewer. I consider that a success. We're already reaching the same heights as the last stream, and it only took us a third of the time. One moment, and you get myself some water. And we're back, folks. I think I might as well just start us off today with going into a bit of unknown territory. With Amazing Stories, Volume 3, Number 11 of 1929. With works here from H.G. Wells, Miles J. Barr. But the real star is page 1024. And you'll see why. Verse 1018. On second thought, Myrnos might also be interesting for a later date. We'll be starting our trip through Pulp with Vegas. Hello there, Lydia. Welcome. With you here, that brings us to 3. The same, I mean, record highs now. Now, as we can continue, let's see. We will start with phagocytes by A.H. Johnson. My world is far different from yours. 100 years ago, my story would have been utterly unintelligible to you, but your science has made such strides that today much of my story will be entirely clear to all. There are still many things, however, that the scientists of your outer world do not know. Perhaps my story may shed light on some of these things. My earliest recollections are of ceaseless movement. I floated in a fast-moving current through a series of passages or tunnels. The fluid in which I floated held many other beings besides myself. We were of all shapes and of contours that would amaze you of the outer world. The size of the passages varied continually. The very smallest were only a little bit larger than they were too small for me to enter, while a great number were only a little larger than myself. From these smaller ones, they ranged to a size so large that many hundreds of beings like myself could move through them at once. In the smaller corridors, the flow of the stream was slow, but in the larger ones it was very rapid. And in 4 of the largest tunnels, it boiled with terrific speed. These passages had a number of inhabitants. Most of them floated free in the stream, but a few lived around the edges of the tunnels. I belonged to what I will call the white race. Few or none of the other animals were as large as we. Our bodies were oval or round in shape and somewhat flat on the upper and lower sides, giving us a disc-like appearance. The fluid in which we lived completely filled the tunnels, and we lived in it somewhat as the fish of your world live in the sea. We had a number of very strong and small and thin arms or limbs, but by means of these we swam in the stream. We could neither speak nor hear, but by means of a sense which you do not have, we were able to communicate with one another. For the sake of making my history clear to you, I will refer to our means of communication as speech. We are not the most numerous species in our world. The red race outnumbered us hundreds to 1. They resembled us in appearance, except they were even more disc-like, and are only from 2/3 to 1/2 as large as we. Also, while we were white in color, they were a brilliant red. In addition to the red race and ourselves, there are numerous other species. Most of these other animals were hostile to us and to the red race, and it was our duty to see that they did not become numerous. They varied in size from 1/6 the size of the red race to a few species slightly larger than the reds. Some are spherical in shape, others resembled a curved, twisted, or straight cylinder. Most of them had tentacles or arms that enabled them to swim. Under normal circumstances, these smaller animals formed only 1/2 of 1% or less the inhabitants of the tunnels. Some of them were entirely harmless, but many were very ferocious and attacked the red race savagely. The red race could not fight. It was their duty to keep the tunnels in good condition and carry food to certain animals that lived along the smaller tunnels. They also removed certain waste products from the stream, keeping it pure. It was our duty to protect the red race, for we knew that if enough of them were killed, the impurities in the stream would increase and we would be unable to live. Those our two races are mutually dependent. Neither could exist without the other. And surprise, surprise, our narrator is a white blood cell. Hello, hello, and it's good to have you on. And with you here, we're now our stream audience is now at a record 4 people. And yeah, you thought this was being racist, but no, it was just blood. I did not know all this at first. My memory of my earlier days only contains a record of passively floating through the passages and absorbing food from the surrounding stream. But gradually I grew in size and became more active. Also, my knowledge increased. I began to learn my way about some of the larger passages. The smaller passages were so numerous that I despaired of ever knowing 1/10,000th of them. But they're not so important to be known as were the larger passages. And for the current was so swift in larger passages that it was impossible to swim against it, and one could only control one's destination by choosing the branch passages to go into. The current swept in a great circle through the tunnels. It went from the larger tunnels to the smaller, and then through the smallest. And these small tunnels were innumerable in quality. Then it went into larger ones, and then through the largest, and then through the smaller again, and so on around the circle. But the length of the circuit varied greatly according to the passages one took. Some of these passages were so long circuitous it was possible to make only a few circuits through them in a lifetime. Others were very short. Before I reached my full growth, I learned how to attack our enemies, whom we called Ansites. All of our race were great fighters. We had no other duties or pastimes than fighting. I thought nothing of tackling 3 or 4 of the large species of Ansites or a dozen of the smaller species. Of our matter of fighting you shall learn later, when I describe the Great Invasion. As we were so superior to the Ansites in fighting, you may wonder how we could ever be in danger for them. But as a matter of fact, we were always in danger. And ceaseless vigilance and activity were necessary to preserve our existence. Our danger was due to the great powers of multiplication possessed by the Ansites. If only a small group of them were allowed to breed undisturbed some remote passageway, they would in a short time emerge in immense multitudes. And we knew that if we were sufficiently outnumbered, we would be unable to cope with them. So we scattered ourselves far and wide through the passages and tried to keep every smallest alcove under watch. Whenever any of the Ansites were discovered, we either hunted them down and destroyed them by ourselves, or, if they were too numerous, we signaled to as many of our comrades as necessary to join in the hunt. Exactly where the Ansites came from, we did not know. It was somewhere in the great outside. They either obtained entrance through breaks in the wall of the passages, or through places where the walls were very thin in the smaller passages. They practically always appeared in the smaller tunnels. There are 2 sets of passages where they were particularly likely to appear. We kept strict watch over both of these, and as they were far removed from each other, we kept a good force near each. The worst of these 2 sets of passages was almost boundless in extent, and we called it the Black Labyrinth because of the endless tunnels it contained, because the Ansites that appeared in it were usually dark in color. The other we called Narrow Places because of the small size of the passages. I had attained full growth and considerable knowledge and experience when the dark day of our race dawned. I was floating quietly near one of the entrances to the Black Labyrinth when word came that the boars, one of the most active but smaller species of Ansites, had appeared in considerable numbers in the Narrow Places. I knew at once that the situation must be serious, for even the news of such an event would have not reached us. For if the number of white soldiers near the Narrow Places has been sufficient to deal with this situation, they would never have said anything about it. I and a number of other white warriors moved toward the larger passages, where the current would carry us toward the Narrow Places. The dark labyrinth and narrow places were almost at opposite ends of the passages, and it was a long journey from one to the other. The circular motion of the current made it possible to choose which passages, as always to have the current in one's favor in moving from one place to the other. Were it not for this fact, a considerable portion of a lifetime would have been expended at such a journey. We moved from the smaller passages into the larger, but the current moved very swiftly. In the largest of the passages, the current boiled and foamed with speed, and we did not attempt swimming. All our efforts were expended in preventing ourselves from either bumping into the wall or each other. The larger tunnels were so big that as long as one did not attempt to move off into branch passages, there was little danger of bumping into the walls. But we frequently had to make turns, and if one were thrown against the walls at this speed, it meant serious injury or death. As we approached the smaller passages near the narrow places, the current slowed down and we were again able to swim. We moved slowly forward, and we knew we would receive word if there was any very pressing need of assistance. We considered the boars very troublesome but not very dangerous. They're too small to constitute a real threat against us, unless in such numbers as to literally block the passageways with their bodies. We began to notice signs of them as we approached the narrow places. These signs were small bits of members of the red race that had been devoured by the boars. The red race could not desert these passages without allowing the stream to become so filled with impurities as to prevent our living in it, and stuck nobly to their work in the face of this danger. Before entering the narrow places, we decided to make use of the fact that although the passages through the narrow places were innumerable, the entrances were few. Thus a stream entered the narrow places rather as a stream in your world may enter a marsh, and flow through the marsh and innumerable small streams combine into one again. We posted guards at the entrances in order to confine the boars in the section of the passages, then we slowly advanced upon them. We found that the white soldiers already present were winning even without our aid. The boars had been pressed back into the smallest of the passages and were being slowly run down and exterminated. The litter in the stream showed, however, that a considerable fight was taking place. Thousands of the red race had been destroyed, and the stream was thick with small pieces of the boars. We saw no white dead. Many of the white soldiers had, however, temporarily withdrawn from the battle to digest such of our enemies as they had seized. We fight by grasping our enemies with their tentacles and eating them. We do not eat as you eat with a particular section of the body. We can eat with our whole body, and we curl around and envelope whatever we eat. Whatever we have enveloped all we can digest, we withdraw to digest it and then return to the fight. We cannot afford to do as you do in attacking an enemy, that is merely injure him enough to kill, for the bodies soon litter the passages so as to hamper movement. Also, the bodies of the anacites left exposed to the stream produce a mixture that is poisonous to us. We must not only kill, but also destroy the body. We divide into small groups and research the innumerable small passages. Let's see. And a minute. I and 3 other of our race were moving slowly along a small passage when far in front we saw several boars. Immediately we dashed forward with the boars fleeing before us. We pursued them through many winding tunnels until at last we knew we were approaching the further edge of the narrow places. We knew then that we had them cornered, for the entrances to both sides of the narrow passages were held by our men. The boars knew it too, and seeing our small numbers, they turned in a savage effort to break through us and double back on their path. There were perhaps 20 of them. The passage here was only wide enough for 2 of us to stand abreast, so I and the largest of the other 3 of our men stood in front and the other 2 just behind us. The boars were only about 1/6 of our size and bulk, but they were equipped with the sharp teeth as well as the tentacles we had. They were shaped like a short, squat rod with a knot on one end. This knot was their head and contained their teeth. They swam forward in a mass and attacked savagely. I seized 3 at once and began to envelope and kill them. I could feel their sharp teeth tearing at me, even biting off small pieces, but I come of a hardy race. In order to kill me, it would have been necessary to tear me entirely apart. My comrade had seized 4 of the boars and was handling them easily. I grabbed 2 more, and the end of this group of the enemy seemed well in sight, but we were not yet called on the 2 soldiers we had in reserve. By this time we heard a noise in the passage behind us and saw some 30 of the boars coming rapidly toward us. They were evidently pursued by another group of our soldiers. This meant we were caught between 2 fires. The boars behind us would fight desperately, believing that if they could break through us they could escape. There was only one thing to do, and it was attack the boars in front and either annihilate them or force them to retreat into the entrance of the narrow places, where the guards would annihilate them and come to our assistance. We charged at once, and the boars were forced back at a short distance, but they understood the situation and did not retreat far. There were only 11 of them now, but my comrade was rather badly torn, and I was somewhat tired. We each seized 2 of them and retired a little to let our 2 fresh soldiers attack. They counted for 4 more, but while they did so, the boars from behind reached us. 8 of them seized my small and wounded comrade and literally tore him into small pieces. Only 12 of them could come abreast, so only 4 were left to attack me. I grasped 2, and on my friends seeing the situation, one of them came to my assistance, leaving the other to finish the remaining 3 boars between us and the entrance to the narrow places. The situation seemed desperate when I saw a line of white warriors sweeping down on the rear of the 28 boars behind us. Now it was they that were held in a trap, and the slaughter was sudden and complete. The white warriors charged on the boars with the impunity and deadly effect of tanks among infantry. Not one of the boars escaped. Scenes like this are taking place all through the narrow places and continue to take place over one lifespan of the boars. We have no measurements of time similar to your days and years. Our environment never changes and could correspond with your days and seasons. If it did, we would probably die. Our only measurement of time is the duration of our lives and those of the animals around us. We live about 20 times as long as the boars. Thus, this war with them took about three of your years. Most of the fighting was on the first part of the war, and the latter part was more of a mere hunt. But the patches were so numerous that almost an entire force was required to search them thoroughly. We cannot divide into groups of less than 5 or 6 for fear of coming on some such situation as we had encountered in the first part of the war. We determined to do the work thoroughly, and in order to do so, we withdrew our patrols from the Black Labyrinth, which had been unusually quiet during the Boers' War. The only precaution we took with regard to the Black Labyrinth was to leave strong guards at all entrances. We were to regret this negligence sadly later. Oh, hello! Oh, wow! Oh, wow! We got 7 whole people here. There's 6 whole people. Holy shit! I was not expecting so many people to show up. Welcome, everybody to Pulp literature. We're currently reading an epic war from the perspective of a white blood cell. We finished the war in excellent shape. We lost less than 100 soldiers, and most of these were killed in circumstances similar to those in which the warrior with me had been killed. With a small loss, we completely exterminated the Boers. It was true that many thousands of the Red race had been killed, but they were so numerous that their losses could hardly be noticed. Also, they were a prolific race, and their natural increase soon filled the gaps. We had hardly finished the Boer War, however, when the Red race brought the most dire news. The work had carried them through the Black Labyrinth, and they reported the most dreaded of the Ansites, the Nars, were present there in great numbers. The Nars were fully twice the size of the Boers and much more savage and active. In addition, they had a weapon not possessed by the Hors. They could throw off from their bodies a poison which, if present in the stream in sufficient quantities, first paralyze and then kill us. It was also deadly to the Red race. Leaving only a small contingent to guard the narrow places, the rest of our soldiers headed at once for the channels where the current flowed toward the dark labyrinth. We had hardly started before we received further and worse news. The Nards had attacked the guards at both entrances of the dark labyrinth and were so numerous that it was feared that their attack would succeed. They were attacking the guards at the far entrances with particular fury. This meant a very grave situation for us, for it would be long before help could reach the guards at the far entrance. The course of the stream was from the set of entrances of the narrow places, where we now were, toward the near entrances of the dark labyrinth, and through the dark labyrinth and out the far entrances, and so around to the other entrances to the narrow places. Thus, in order to reach the far entrances to the dark labyrinth, it would be necessary to either go through the dark labyrinth, which was swarming with Nars, or swim against the current and go back by the same route through which we had come to the narrow places, or, and this was the only route left any hope of reaching the far entrances in time to be of any use, to follow the current on past the near entrances of the dark labyrinth, and beyond the labyrinth where it curved around in a great half circle, and finally came back by the far entrances. By following this route, we would have the current with us all the way, and it was so extremely long that we doubted if we could arrive in time. Still, this was our only chance, and we determined to take it. A third of our force, composed of the ablest fighters and the fastest swimmers, was sent to follow this route. The rest followed in a more leisurely manner. They were to attack the Nars from near entrances of the labyrinth. I formed part of the advance force. We swam rapidly forward, hunting for the channels of the current moved with terrible speed. We did not merely float with it, but aided our progress by swimming. The turns were taken in a desperate race, and several of our number were crushed at almost every turn. But we did not hesitate, for we knew that if the Nars broke past the guard of the far entrances, they had spread through the whole stream, and we would never be able to beat them. The stream whirled and seethed around us, but we still continued our mad pace. Then we were moving through the smaller and lower passages, and were more than halfway to the near entrances. Next we approached the near entrances, so as no sign of the struggle must be going on. The current flowed away from us and carried such signs toward the far entrances. Then we shot past the near entrances. In a brief glimpse, we saw hundreds of our warriors grouped near them. We later learned that the attack on them had merely been strong enough to prevent them from sending aid to the guards at the other gates. So my users the word passages. The passages that go on and beyond the dark labyrinth are small, and we had little benefit from the current in moving through them. We went at the top of our speed. We must reach the far entrances while our guards still held them or our race was doomed. The red workers who were drifting through the passages were glad to see our warriors, and told us that the guards at the near entrances were standing firm, but they had no news from the far entrances. On we swept. 3/4 of our journey was done. The passages were again becoming larger, and the current added to our speed. Our warriors were spread out in a straggling line with the fastest swimmers in front. The slower swimmers were thoroughly exhausted, and a stop was determined upon to allow them to rest before attacking the Nars. But a fourth of our group, composed of the fastest swimmers, decided to proceed without a pause. I formed part of this group. Leaving the rest of our party, we moved on. Soon we were approaching the far entrances. We made a momentary pause to reorganize just before turning the last curve before reaching the far entrances. Then we rushed on. As we turned the curve, a terrible sign met our eyes. We left over 1,000 of our best warriors to guard these entrances. Now I saw perhaps 150 badly torn and wounded. And white warriors slowly giving way before a swarm of Nars. The passage into the black labyrinth was very large. It was big enough to allow 200 of our soldiers to stand abreast. 150 warriors were a short distance down this passage and slowly retreating toward us. The Nars are egg-shaped, with numerous arms or legs looking somewhat like an egg with a ragged fringe around it. This fringe is composed of their legs and tentacles. The Nars have powerful teeth and jaws, and they were using them against our soldiers with deadly effect. The stream was filled with the bits of the red race and pieces of our soldiers and of the Nars. It was apparent that our soldiers were practically beaten, but they still held the entrance. This whole thing just reminds me of the cell stage in Spore. Or it might just be the fact that I played a lot of Spore when I was growing up. Oh shit, we're at 7 people now. It's an all-time high. We dashed into the fight at once. At first we were uniformly successful. The Nars were pushed back some distance into the labyrinth, but soon rallied and returned to the attack. The stream was filled with bits of bodies, and the red race had been almost exterminated in these places. Their absence meant that the stream was becoming impure. This was worse for us than for the Nars, for the stream flowed from them to us. Then the Nars began to use their poisonous emissions. Many of our white warriors were partially paralyzed and some killed. We were forced to draw back to the outer edges of the entrances so that the pure stream which flowed around the dark labyrinth would wash away the poisons. The Nars, seeing only a short distance between them and the open stream, attacked with renewed ferocity. We were entirely outnumbered. We had some 2,000 warriors already at the far entrances, and 8,000 more were due to arrive. But the Nars were numberless. As fast as we killed off the front ranks, others replaced them. This could not go on long. When one of our warriors was attacked by 10 or more of the Nars, his fate was sealed at once. Our front flank was melting away. We could not retreat, for to do so would turn the Nars loose in the stream. So our soldiers died where they stood. Half of them had been killed, and many more partially or wholly disabled by the Nars' poisons when our main force came up. They at once took over the battle, while we received a brief rest. We soon saw that even these numbers would be insufficient to hold back the Nars for more than a short time. Where was the rest of our force? Why were they not attacking in the near entrances and sweeping through the labyrinth to fall on the rear of the Nars that attacked us? Unless they completed some such maneuver speedily, we would be finished. We would not retreat while we lived, but there would come a time, and that time was not far off, when there would be none of us alive. We were ordered back into the battle. I was in the 5th rank, and so far entirely unhurt. I watched the Nars sweep against the 1st rank in a raging mass. The line seemed to dissolve under their attack. The 2nd rank moved forward through the floating pieces of bodies to take their place. The stream was becoming even more filled with bits of our warriors and pieces of the Nars. As I've told you, we not only killed the Nars, but destroyed their bodies by eating them. But when one of our warriors, who had seized several of the Nars, was torn in pieces, the bits of the Nars were turned loose in the stream. Sorry, give me a moment to get some breath and get some water. Next, the 2nd rank was destroyed, and the 3rd moved up to take its place. Our warriors received and enveloped thousands of the Nars, but still they came out in apparently undiminished numbers. For every one of our soldiers killed, 5 or 6 of the Nars must have died. But still, the Nars came on. Soon I was in next to the front rank, and we moved up to the front itself. I was at the very end of the line with a passage wall on my left, and this fact gave me some protection. I seized 2 of them. Only 4,000 of our warriors were left now, and many of these were both wounded and gored to the bodies of the Nars. This scourged condition made our soldiers inactive. The Nars, for some reason, continued to cease pressing the attack for a short time. We afterwards found they were holding a council. Then they came forward with a renewed energy and in even greater numbers. The rest had done our warriors good, and we met them with greater ferocity than their own. Our front rank charged them savagely and pushed them far back into the labyrinth. But this proved our undoing. For our front rank went past several side passages, and the Nars came out of these side passages and attacked them in the rear. Not one of them came back. The Nars, encouraged by the destruction of our front rank, attacked with increased vigor. We knew that we could not hold out much longer. But at last the longed-for event happened. We heard the sound of fighting far back in the labyrinth. It can mean just one thing. Our troops had fought their way through the labyrinth and would soon arrive to support us. Nars are caught between us and we're in a trap. But will the walls of the trap hold? The Nars realized the situation and attacked with a wild and desperate abandon that made their previous efforts seem tame. No longer did they spar for openings to their warriors, somewhat as a wolf attacks an elk in your world. Now they rushed right in, knowing the first 3 or 4 would be killed. Under such tactics, our soldiers melted away like snow before the sun. Soon there were only 600 of us left. We stood in 3 ranks. It seemed to be almost over. By spending their energy in attacking us, the Nars had left their rear almost unguarded, and our main force composed of some 20,000 soldiers was sweeping them before them. Fully 3/4 of the Nars turned to hold off this force, while the rest were to finish us. But the rest were insufficient to finish us. We held our own. The Nars were finished! They broke before the attack of our main body and fled down various side passages. Then 2,000 of our warriors forced their way through and reinforced us. After that we hunted them down, as we hunted the boars. We had won! And that's the story. Yeah, honestly, the manga adaptation of Cells at Work is a bit different than I thought it was going to be. Right, take a break, a little bit of a break to rest my voice. Let's see, there's a couple of... Let's see. So far, there seems like a lot of very solid stories in this one. Again, I suppose when this is the day when they had H.G. Wells on the table. Read back. See, The Death of the Moon, that one is just 6 pages. Huh. Murnos is 18. Yeah, Death of the Moon it is. Just a bit further. Always, the page numbering on this is a bit weird, but eh. Death of the Moon by Alexander Phillips. A grassy, treeless plain, for the most part smooth and level, swept off to the far horizon. Across its surface a few small bodies of water were scattered, quiet and motionless in the drowsy sunlight. Northward, a cliff rose abruptly from the peaceful level of the surrounding country, trailing off on either side out of sight. It appeared to consist of some hard rock such as granite that was much worn by water, its surface being studded with the mouths of caves and small, queerly carved-out thrustings of strata. Upon the summit of the cliff grew a lush and semi-tropical vegetation, in direct contrast to the plain. This plant life consisted of brilliantly colored undergrowth and tall, peculiar-looking trees, all of which followed the trend of the cliff and vanished in the distance. Over this quiet and peaceful scene, the mellow and hazy sun beamed, while primitive-looking insects droned and hummed in the undergrowth of plain and cliff alike. Suddenly the quiet was broken up by the scream of fearful agony. At the edge of one of the lakes, a horrible, bony-scaled, fish-like creature with blank, expressionless eyes had seized upon an oversized amphibian and was methodically chewing him in half. The fish dragged his victim below the surface, and the screaming ceased. The scene was not as peaceful as it appeared. Long before this, the unending cycle had begun. Okay, I actually missed the forward of this. Here's an altogether different tale, and short as it is pregnant with thought-provoking ideas which will not fail to hold your interest. The story is told so convincingly, the facts set forth are so plausible, and sometimes we hardly find it difficult to believe it to be true. We'd hoped to have further stories from the pen of this new author. Oh, I guess some things just really haven't changed. Just glowing reviews as usual. Such was the greater part of the continent of North America 5 million years ago, when time was nearing what is known as the end of the Cretaceous period, and preparing the world for the advent of the domination of mammals. Ah yes, 5 million years ago, the Cretaceous. Oh, thanks, Lids. Thank you with the stutter. I found that it tends to go down a little bit. It goes down a little bit when I'm doing something I kind of prepared to do. At that era of formation, the great American continent was being constantly flooded over vast areas by a shallow, half-warm sea, which was just as constantly drained off again. The withdrawal of the sea left great expanses of treeless plains, with here and there on ground which had not been submerged, large forests of the weird vegetation of that period. There was also animal life. With the inrushing seas came the marine life and amphibian giants, who had ages before lost their world dominance and not yet come to their final extinction. With the rising of the lands and the draining off of the waters came the land animals, the kings of the earth, following their environment always. During this period came the lull just before the terrific glacial ages which followed in rapid succession. Climate was mild and warm, there were no great upheavals or floods, and it was in this setting that the dinosaurs played their last great part in the drama of life and gave over world dominion to the mammals. Theirs was a glorious farewell indeed, for they culminated their race, which was the greatest of all the ords of the reptiles, and their carnivores the mightiest beasts of prey that ever walked the earth. And the mightiest of these, the most terrible engine of destruction known to the history of the world, was Tyrannosaurus rex, king of the tyrant lizards. As the screams ceased, the monstrous ferns and their foliages upon the cliff's edge parted, and into the cheerful sunlight stepped Tyrannosaurus rex. He walked upright, as did all carnivorous dinosaurs, and his ugly, cruel head with his incredibly powerful jaws towered a full 18 feet above the earth. His forelimbs were much shorter than his hind legs, and were carried as a man would his hands. All 4 feet were armed with long, curved claws, any of which could rip open an enemy from jowl to flank in one lightning-like stroke. In the hind limbs there were also the tremendous running and jumping muscles, capable of carrying the heavy body over the ground at a speed that was truly marvelous. His body, though ponderous, was compact and lithe, hiding within it muscles that were the boast of nature, while to finish it off was a long and weighty but easily handled tail. Sweeping his cold, hard, expressionless eyes over the scene before him, he detected in a swampy, rush-infested lake one of the gigantic herbivores on which his kind fed. For an instant, body tense, head poised and immensely reminiscent of a snake, he stood there. Then he disappeared, the foliage slipped back into place as silently as it had opened. He traced his way back through the jungle to a narrow gorge which had one time been a watercourse, now made a path down to the level of the plain. Down this he moved as easily and smoothly as a cat, and thus around the base of the cliff. Here he made sure his quarry was still engaged in filling its enormous stomach, and then left the cliff and started in its direction. Crouching, darting, making use of every color, he gradually approached the feeding saurian. The latter, a monstrous, grotesque beast, heavy of body and legs, but with an inconceivably elongated neck and tiny head, stood on all fours, plucking and eating the succulent roots and grasses at the lakeside. From time to time his head and neck writhed above the surrounding tall rush-like vegetation, as he watched for possible enemies. At such times the great beast stalking him would cease all motion, holding himself tense in the peculiar manner of reptiles, skin loose but muscles held like corded steel. When he had reached the limitations of the taller rushes, the Tyrannosaurus scattered his hind limbs under him, the final move before the charge. This was not a test of strength he was about to enter, but a trial of speed. The herbivore had no valid means of defending itself against the meat-eater, and so depended upon its ability to reach the comparative safety of the lake, in which the Tyrannosaurus would not follow him. Just as the latter prepared to leap, his prey raised its head for another unwary inspection. Slowly the ridiculously small head turned to take in all the scene, which was about to sink into its feast of grasses again, when it stopped short and stood as though frozen. Sadly, the two great beasts stared at each other, resembling fantastically carved rocks in their motionlessness. An easy, roaming wind sighed and rustled among the rush tops, and a weird, throbbing cry floated across the serene surface of the lake. Then the tension broke, and the gigantic saurian sprang to action. With a dry, sibilant hiss, the carnivore flashed across the clearing in great, earth-shaking bounds while the grass-eater charged, an amazing speed for so ponderous a creature, toward the shore of a lake. Fast as he was, Tyrannosaurus was even faster, and at 10 feet from the shore sprang fairly upon his victim's back. There was a moment of thunderous crashing, an intense, high-pitched screaming, and the violently agitated rushes resumed their tranquil bowing to the idling wind. Tyrannosaurus Rex had once more proved his right to kingship. While the kings of the earth roamed and fought over the forming surface of their world, the fate of an entire race hung on the word of one individual. Some 240,000 miles away was the moon, offspring and captive of the earth. Being much less than half the size of its large companion, it naturally cooled much more quickly at a far earlier period, was capable of supporting life. And life, with its incomprehensible purpose and apparently aimless struggles, immediately took possession of the diminutive globe. It developed and prospered, reached its maturity, and then the moon began to die. Though evolution upon the satellite had not proceeded along the same rates as that upon the Earth, it had produced as a climax an intelligence which was in advance of that existing in man. Though evolution upon the satellite had not proceeded along the same lines as upon the Earth, it had produced as a climax intelligence which was in advance of that existing in man upon the terrestrial sphere today. These creatures, representing the pinnacle of Lunarian intelligence, were confined to a single species and had been able, for an enormous period of time, to support their life upon the moon by artificial methods. However, thousands of years before the actual occurrence, the Lunarian scientists had predicted that the necessary chemicals, mineral ores, and natural gases used in the manufacture of the artificial foods, air, water, and other staples of life would disappear under pressure of constant use. It was apparent that the only course left when such a condition arose would be to leave the moon for another celestial body. And naturally, as the Earth was the nearest, migration would turn in that direction. For this purpose, through thousands of years, the Lunarian scientists have been working, the progress coming closer and closer to the achievement throughout the centuries. It thus developed that, just before the extinction of the dinosaurs upon Earth, the accrued knowledge of thousands of years of Lunarian toil was possessed by one individual, who had, from his tremendous research work, evolved a machine which he believed would convey him and his race to the safety of the terrestrial planet. This machine came none too soon, however, for already the life on the higher mountains was fleeing to the lowlands. There was, therefore, no time for the scientist to make trial flights in which to make certain of the ability of his machine to cross the fearful limitless abyss, or to certain whether or not his race could exist upon the new world in whose characteristics, though so near, the Lunarians have been unable to probe very deeply. The inventor, under these pressing urgencies, decided that he and a number of the most brilliant scientific minds in his world would embark on this greatest of all journeys as soon as conditions allowed. If it was successful, he would return alone and direct the completion of the thousands of interplanetary cars then under construction, and the immense migration would begin. It was urgently necessary that he should return, for he alone understood the intricate and complex machinery of the cars. Without him, all would be lost. All other occupations had been long abandoned. The whole Lunarian world waited breathlessly for the hourly reports coming from all over the surface of the great underground workshop where the vehicle to convey the inventor and his colleagues was receiving its last overhauling and testing. Their purport was monotonously the same. One after another, the gigantic air manufacturing plants ceased work for lack of materials, the heat dispensing centers gave out, the lighting systems were failing. The Lunarian people, as a body, were moving to the three great workshops. The migration would start, and here rumor and panicky fear had run riot. The testing and stocking of the inventor's private machine were soon completed, and as they were just entering the moon's long night, the inventor determined that before the next daylight he would have left for the Earth. It is perhaps well to explain here that the Lunarian night is now about 29 earthly days in length, and was, even at that earlier period, but little shorter. The workshop in which the completed machine was housed was situated at the end of a long, narrow valley between stark, rugged mountains, high beyond all comprehension. These terrific piles ranged miles into the sky, fantastic and abrupt in outline, and formed a living background for the strangest of all ventures. The workshop, which was underground, was nevertheless higher than the rest of the valley, being on a portion of the valley floor which had been volcanically raised. It was on the roof of this workshop the machine now stood, a sharp-nosed, winged cylinder. It seemed to be, as it awaited the appearance of the tremendous orb of the earth over the guarding mountains, some dread messenger of fate, somberly indifferent. Underground all was seething bustle. In the workshop, last-minute tests were being taken, harnesses were donned, and strange apparatus were being gone over minutely. In the great underground chambers beneath the main valley floor, the mightiest concourse ever gathered together awaited. with tense emotions, the signal which would send them rushing to the surface. At last it came, and in a trice the valley was filled to overflowing, all eyes concentrated upon the dominant figure of the cylinder upon the platform. A death-like silence fell over the mountains. The Lunarians, the car itself, seemed awaiting the appearance of those great adventurers who dared the very depths of infinity. Then a trapdoor beside the car opened, and the scientists filed out, all immediately entering the machine with the exception of the inventor, who carefully went over its entire exterior. Finishing his inspection, he turned and gazed out upon his fellows, who had come to see him off in this most monstrous of all journeys. In him lay their hope of life. In one way only he resembled a human. He stood upright. In every other way he had progressed along different lines of development. His body was curiously like some of the lower terrestrial animals, in that it was segmented. The segmentation ceased at the portion which could be called the thorax, as the head was immediately joined to this latter part. He possessed 6 limbs, all of whose extremities were equipped with elongations resembling digits, but which were much more flexible. Each so-called digit contained a number of strong sucking organs. The entire body was encased in a hard, horny substance which was jointed frequently. His head was, in contrast, covered with some growth resembling fur which completely encircled the large compound eyes and side-closing horn-like jaws. He used only 2 limbs for walking. Dressed in thick, cold-resistant clothes and carrying a heavy helmet, he presented a peculiar figure. On all sides were tremendous mountains. Behind him was a sullen machine, while slowly creeping down the valley floor, over the heads of the Lunarians, showed the baleful green light of the great earth orb. What strange thoughts and feelings roamed through the mind of this being who thought to wander at will in the motionless, boundless depths of eternal space as he bade good-bye to his world? Some prophetic foreboding stirred uneasily in the depths of his mind. Silently he looked on, and silently his fellows returned his look. Then he turned and entered the cylinder. The great circular door clanged shut, sounding weirdly hollow in that silent valley. The powerful mechanism beneath the rocket-like car slowly, in dead silence, raised it until its nose pointed into the far and mysterious reaches of that star-studded sky. And all was ready for the most momentous journey ever conceived. All was tensely, strangely silent in the valley. From high above, the earth orb looked down, coldly impersonal, flooding the valley and the jagged peaks in its strange green light. Beyond it, innumerable stars sardonically watched this attempt to avoid the inevitable. And upon the platform rested the planet car, seemingly waiting for some remote call to send it hurrying into the darkness above. For ages, it seemed, the portentous silence held, all motion lost. Then came a tremendous, earth-shaking roar and a monstrous cloud of greenish vapor. The sky car flashed away on its fearful plunge into space. In heavy silence, the Lunarians departed from the valley and left it once more to the desolate solitude. So yeah, we got Bugmen and going to the dinosaur world. I should probably clarify that around this time period, the general idea was that life on other planets would evolve along much the same lines as ours, as in general as in we used to have reptiles, amphibians, mammals, fish, that sort of thing. However, the general consensus was that like on older worlds, an older world's life would have evolved a lot more, would have already evolved to a lot more advanced states. On younger ones, it would be more primitive. It's how you got the idea of dinosaurs on Venus. The idea, since Venus was a bit of a younger planet than Earth, its evolution would still be late. Its life would still be fairly early in its history. Hence, dinosaurs. The link of bugs bugs being the last things to outlive humans, though. That one, I think, actually may have started with H.G. Wells. Like, even before War of the Worlds, one of the things he posited was that insects and arthropods could one day replace humanity. Once more the warm, golden sun shed his hazy effulgence over the vast prehistoric American plain. The tall, drowsy rushes bowed fitfully to the unhurried breeze, and billowy, sun-reflecting clouds sailed slowly along the horizon. In the distance, the dancing heat waves performed queer antics against the background of the familiar water-worn cliff, and the quiet lakes smiled dreamily as the breeze rumpled their surfaces. Strange and heavily armored insects zoomed and rumbled among the reed beds, and high above, so high as to be barely indistinguishable against the faultless blue of the sky vault, some distant progenitor of the immense bird-life to be swung on motionless wings in great continuous circles. Without any jarring effect on the somnolent piece, a deep, resonant thrumming became gradually perceptible, increasing in volume until a pointed, winged cylinder from which the sound came appeared from behind the cliff and sank gently into the rushes. For some time it lay there, without sign of life, but at last a thick circular door opened, and the Lunarian adventurer stepped boldly into the earthly sunlight. He gazed at the strange landscape for a space, and none may know what thoughts and feelings passed through his mind, what ambitions were appeased, or what long-restrained desires were, in this hour, fulfilled and satisfied. He had accomplished the impossible. He had crossed the greatest boundary life had yet encountered. As he stood there in thought, his companions began to group themselves about him, gazing with wonder and delight upon the luxuriant vegetation, the darkly limpid waterways, and the varied and plentiful life. It now only remained to the adventurer to return across the bottomless abyss, to mark the completion of the thousands of sky cars which he had before been unable to do, and the great migration could begin. It was necessary, however, to remain some days on the earth, for the machine had to be tested and gone over before attempting the return trip. During this time, they explored the immediate vicinity and gained some knowledge of the earth's condition and life. They therefore spent that day in a rigorous examination of the life about and composition of some of the nearest of the lakes. When the sound of the Lunarian car had first become noticeable, Tyrannosaurus Rex, perhaps out of curiosity, had followed it through the jungle on the cliff to the edge of the plain. He had therefore been a witness to the landing and primary exploration of the Lunarians. For some reason, he had not attacked them, but after a few hours he returned to the depths of the jungle where he would have probably remained had it not been for the Moon Men. Led on by wonder after wonder, the latter had wandered farther and farther afield. On the second day, he decided to explore part of the jungle on the cliff before the adventurer left. As yet they had seen none of the great dinosaurs and had no knowledge of them. The Lunarian set out in a body, and after laboriously scaling the face of the cliff, proceeded directly into the dense tropical woodland. This afforded them much of interest, and after aimlessly drifting from one object to another for several hours, they came upon a gulch which had one time been a watercourse, and now led down on a gradual slope to the plain. Here the geological and mineralogical formations held their attention, and were soon engrossed in the study of specimens. Unknown to them, this was the habitual path used by the Tyrannosaurus when going down to the plain. The forces of fate had gathered and were soon to strike. Tyrannosaurus Rex, coming down the canyon with his unusual easy caution, came suddenly upon the strange creatures he had seen the day before. He was undiscovered, so he stopped and watched them, his unwinking jet eyes and cruel, hideously armed mouth giving no expression at all to his face. He had come upon them in an abrupt turn in the canyon, and only his head was visible. The remainder of his body was hidden by the moss-covered rock. From there, with his great body held tense and rigid, he watched them with that crouching, utterly emotionless gaze which only reptiles can assume. The afternoon had almost gone, the sun was approaching the distant, unbroken horizon, and the long beams of sunlight were feeling their way up the tree-shaded canyon which opened to the west, and when the Lunarians decided to start back toward the car, and then fate struck. A Lunarian, preparing to leave, looked up from a rock he had been studying, and stared straight into the grim glare of the gigantic saurian. For perhaps a minute he stared motionless, one limb outstretched for an instrument and half bent over. This was the moment before the blow fell, in the forest, the air, the whole universe seemed held in breathless suspense. Then, with a peculiar, chattering cry, he sprang upright, seized a strangely formed apparatus from his middle, and worked the tentacles on the end of his limb convulsively over it. The rasping hiss, a dark red stream, which ceased almost as suddenly as it began, sprang from one end of the instrument and flickered lightly over a portion of the saurian's throat, leaving behind a deep gash from which the blood flowed sluggishly. At the sound of the cry, the Lunarians spaced about just in time to see Tyrannosaurus, bleeding at the throat and hissing terribly, spring from behind the turn in the canyon some distance away. They saw with horror the tremendous power expressed in every line of the great beast, and with one accord began retreating down the gorge. Its retreat changed immediately into swift flight as Tyrannosaurus sprang in pursuit. It was hopeless from the start. The monstrous leaps of the saurian far surpassed in speed anything they'd ever thought be possible to lesser living creatures. And they soon stopped running, therefore, and faced the charging giant, their one thought being to save the life of the adventurer at any cost to their own. Though the red streaks from the Lunarian weapon seared his body constantly, Tyrannosaurus Rex did not once hesitate from his fearful charge down the canyon, and unknowingly, the fate of humanity to come hung upon his ability to reach and wipe out his enemies. If he failed, if he were killed, and the Lunarians escaped, they would overrun the world and preclude forever the development of man on the earth. But nothing could stop the irresistible charge. Suddenly he was upon them, striking and ripping with all 4 feet. In the first second, the heavy tail crushed the life from two, and the death of the others soon followed, till there remained only the inventor, backed against the canyon wall. Tyrannosaurus stood, breathing heavily, in the center, eyeing him. A saurian had not escaped unscathed from his attack. Blood ran from wounds all over his body, and one foreleg hung limp and useless at his side. For only a second did he pause, and then sprang full at the Lunarian. Even as he left the ground, a red stream played momentarily upon his body, but could not stop him from his purpose. He struck beside the inventor. One huge foreleg delivered a fearful blow. The Lunarian lay stretched upon the rock floor of the ancient watercourse. A flashing moment, a second of time, and the work of uncountable centuries, of unnumbered millions of years, was gone for naught, as though it had never been. Why had life originated upon the moon? Why had it struggled up from simplicity to complexity, from ignorance to brilliant knowledge, ever only to be destroyed in the end by a giant inhabitant of the earth? Such is life always, seemingly without purpose, aimless, incomprehensible, and playing a game it cannot hope to win. Extinction is the only end for any species. Thus went the great amphibians on the earth, giving place to the dinosaurs, who also, after millions of years' development, disappeared and were replaced by the mammals. As Tyrannosaurus gave the death stroke, he swayed, and a second after the Lunarian fell, his slayer sank beside him. A few Lunarians stirred and twitched, but finally, except for the sobbing breath of the dying dinosaur, all was still. Tyrannosaurus lay, as did the still living inventor, facing the west, and both could look out over the unbroken plains to the western sky. The great tawny sun was just sinking behind the wavering grasslands, and its level rays reached far across the plains floor and up the canyon, bathing all in a solemn, ethereal glow. High above them, in the broken canopy of multicolored trees and giant ferns, an easy, roaming wind sighed and rustled, now and then exposing a patch of blue sky. From far away across the still bosoms of the drifting lakes drifted a weird, throbbing cry, a cry as sorrowful and as mysterious as age-old life itself. The sinking sun bathed the saurian's grim visage in a soft, warm light. As he gazed into the last sunset he would ever see, across far space into the mellow glory of the life-giver, Tyrannosaurus's eyes softened, and was vested with a dim, far-away dignity as one whose purpose is accomplished. Gradually the harsh sobbing diminished and finally ceased, and Tyrannosaurus rex, king of the giant lizards, most terrible of all carnivores and most feared, had gone forever from Earth. The sun was gone. Far along the west stretched a streak of amber light, all else the night had claimed. High above the canyon, showing through a space in the leaves, sailed the round full moon, showing her pure white light like a protecting mantle over the broken, pathetic body of her perished son, the inventor, while deep below her surface she hid a waste awaiting his triumphant return. Long would they wait. Long. That was quite a bit of a darker story. So like for a story published in 1929, they give a lot of fucking respect to T-Rex. A high bear. Kind of just has a lot of like, kind of the disparity between like how scientists portrayed T-Rex and how they were insistent about it, between how the public perceived it. Like there's different flavors of Charles R. Knight's Leaping Laelaps in that. Okay, I'm gonna take a break from this issue for a bit, because it's time we had some good sci-fi. Now to show you some of the good pulp. Now to show you some of the awful stuff. Now we've all talked. Now, I'm sure we've all heard about the infamous work, Wheels Ripped My Flesh, and the story of how that was inspired by pulp magazines. It turns out, yeah, this was a whole industry back in the 50s, with some of the most amazing article titles I've ever seen. For example, we got For Men Only, Exotic Adventures, Courage, Complete Man, Climax, Man's Action, Male, Man's Book, Man's Combat, Man's Daring, Man's Guts, Man's Illustrated. So many men in this, so many men. The most manly thing. Yeah, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. These were all shit. Like, we got lesbian mud wrestlers, the problem with sex in America. The free love girls to start an angel cycle war. Las Vegas's mad dog heisters, how big insurance companies pay you for a sucker. Hunt for the man killers of Jaguar Swamp. It's all meant for that kind of thing. There's some one of the genres that I find very interesting is the attacked by small animal, the attacked by killer versions of small animals genre. It turns out it's not just weasels. There's fucking every single every single thing in a pet store that you could reliably think of has probably had a story where a bunch of them killed a person in these ones. And to prove it, we're going to go with the one that actually the story that actually convinced me to do this in the first place. Attacked by monster crabs! And also with some other fascinating things as The Sexiest Girl in Japan, Safari of Death, a South American striptease mill, France's nude model ball, The Sex Orgies of Sarawak. As you know, there's other types of sex orgies. But fuck that, we're here for monster crabs. Oh shit. Nope. God, fuck. This is tasteless. It's all tasteless. It's all tasteless. Full respect. It's YouTube. Attacked by monster crabs, page 29. Oh, yep. Oh, shit. Can you think of a more horrible way to die than to be torn to shreds by a horde of monster crabs? I can't, because it almost happened to me. Okay, you know what? Fair point, author. Point, Mr. Narrator. Being torn apart by crabs, that sounds like a pretty horrible way to go. I need a little bit to rest my throat. I know. Yeah, fair warning, I do not know how to edit. So most of this, if this gets demonetized, it gets demonetized. Not that I'm making any jokes on them. I'm not making any money off of this shit. Unless, of course, we get some super chats. I'm fucking with you. It would be nice. It would be nice to be able to make some money off of this, but I get this probably not going to happen anytime soon. Okay, the crabs themselves, some pretty decent illustrations of crabs, Like, yeah, that's pretty evil, pretty fucking evil looking crab. It's not that bad for a crab. They even got like the mouth parts right. Of course, the spikes, it's close enough. This is the place, Pamela said. We'll be all alone here. Nobody ever comes here but me. And so you. And hopefully you. We climbed out of our outboard motorboat and up onto the sandy shore. We come ashore in a tiny mangrove-dotted inlet along the coast of British Honduras, a little ways north of Belize, the capital. The place was idyllic, and we had the whole beach to ourselves, Pamela and I. I was looking forward to a long afternoon of love with this busty daughter of a British diplomat. I wasn't prepared for the nightmare events that would take place that afternoon. "Do you come here very often?" I asked as we beached the boat. She grinned enigmatically. "Whenever I feel the need to get away from the town." "You come alone?" "Sometimes," she said, "unless I have company. Interesting company like you, David." Hand in hand we climbed up the beach plank. It was a warm, muggy day. Pamela was wearing a man's white shirt whose buttons barely managed to hold back the magnificent thrusts of her bosom, and a pair of khaki trousers that clung tightly to her hips and thighs. Overhead the hot sun was burning its way through the thick clouds. I spread a blanket for the two of us. There were 2 bottles of local rum in the boat, for refreshments. But we'd forgotten them. "I'll go back to the boat and get them," I said. When I reached the boat, I scooped up the bottles and looked up beach. Pamela was peeling off her blouse. She had nothing on underneath. I ogled her gently swaying breasts appreciatively as I approached. She unbuttoned the trousers, kicked them off, and stood lovely and nude before me. Her body was evenly tanned. She had no telltale strips of white across her middle. From her throat down to her full round breasts to her beautifully sculpted legs, she was a splendid golden brown. She shook her red hair out in the air. "Come, get undressed, and let's have a swim first," she said in those crisp British accents that sounded so out of place in this primitive Central American country. Yeah, that was another thing. Just get everyone. Yeah, these things are horny and also very racist. It's part and parcel with it. "After we bathe, we can enjoy ourselves in the blanket." Smiling, I said, "You go ahead and get your feet wet while I'm opening the bottle. I want a nip of rum before I get into the water." She nodded and went skipping down to the edge of the beach, where the Caribbean waters lapped against the sand. As she ran, I watched the smooth play of muscles in her back and buttocks. If ever a girl had been made for love, I thought, Pamela had. Yeah, I'm trying. Hopefully, hopefully demonetize. Won't get demonetized. Avoiding the algorithm robots. Oh, we got 6 people on now. She waded out into the shallow water. Anyways, welcome newcomers. Have a good time. Say some comment. If anyone wants to have something to say in the comments, feel free. And she waded out into the shallow water while busying myself with a corkscrew attachment of my knife. Finally, I got the bottle open, took a deep, tingling pull of the flavorsome British Honduras-style rum. Glancing down beach, I saw Pamela gleefully splashing around. She was swimming along shore towards a projecting cove over to the east. I unbuckled my belt and started to slip out of my trousers. Suddenly I heard screams. "David! David, help! The crabs! The crabs!" I shaded my eyes and looked down beach for her. She was almost completely hidden around the cove. All I could see of her was her body from the breasts upwards. She was leaping around wildly in the shallow water some 30 feet offshore. Grabbing up the unopened bottle of rum to use as a weapon, I sprinted toward the water. "What's happening?" I yelled. "What's the trouble?" "The crabs!" she shrieked. "The monster crabs!" Half stumbling over myself in my hurry, I reached the edge of the shore. There was Pamela, offshore in water no higher than her lovely knees, and monster crabs a foot across were leaping up out of the water, gnashing their ugly pincers at her nude form. The water seemed to boil with their hideous forms. There must have been hundreds of the crabs swarming up from their slumbers in the mud. She was screaming in utter, mindless panic. I could see a bloody gash along one arm, another just beneath one jouncing breast. She was doing a wild dance, a death dance, and the water around her was stained with red. I heard the sound the crabs made, the dull, ominous clack-clack sound of heavy pincers cracking together. Pamela was trying to beat the monsters off with her hands, but they were slashing her mercilessly on hip and thigh and arm and belly and buttock and every other part of her body they could reach. Oh, shit. God damn it. Raising my bottle high as a club, I waded out into the water, conscious of my unprotected nakedness was terribly vulnerable to the attack of the crabs. I didn't care. I had to save Pamela, even if I had to risk them snipping my pee-pee. Crabs, it's the horny police. The crabs have come to revoke your horny privileges. Next part is basically just a bunch of stuff like giving context for all this. Like how these two met, as if we give a single shit about anything except the crab attack. You guys want me to go into that, or should I just skip to the crab? Go back to more crab action. All right, as one vote for more crab. Anyone else? Any other takers? I get 2 votes for crabs, and with let's see, and with 5 people voting, and 5 people voting for more crabs, that voting for crabs, that makes I'm going to pass it, and the crabs have it. In democracy, only 2 of the 5 voted, so democracy wins again. I've already told the next part of how we reached the boat, how Pamela stripped down to the buff and went down to the shore to wade. It was there that the hellish nightmare began, the nightmare that's haunted me every night in the 3 years since that day, the nightmare of attacking crabs. Pamela's face was a hideous mask of sheer terror and pain as I waded toward her, slipping and sliding in the slimy mud. Evil claws flicked up from the water around her, drawing blood at every touch, and was cut off by the shore by a solid mass of the crabs. The drifting tide sent 6 slicks of blood up and down the shore, and more crabs were on the way to join the attack. I was 30 feet away from her, 20, 15. My breath was coming in ragged bursts as I tried to run through the shallow water. I slipped and fell headlong. The rum bottle dropped because it was the closest thing to a weapon I had. I knelt and groped in the choppy surf till I found it again. "I'm coming, Pam!" I yelled. "Hurry! Kill them! They're tearing me apart, Lisa!" Continuing on page 53. Yeah. Okay, my mouse just, for some reason, this isn't. How the fuck? Okay, I somehow lost visibility of my mouse. In a minute. Uh, okay, in a minute. Just, okay, mouse point disappeared. Sorry, folks. Just I can wrangle my computer. There we fucking go. It's back. Sorry about that. Continue on page 53. Yeah, here we go. Attacked by hot fire lanced through my left thigh, and I knew that I'd reached the breeding ground of the crabs. I slammed down with a bottle, hard, and something loathsome crunched. The dead crab still clung to my flesh. I brushed it away. Pamela was surrounded by crabs now. They'd almost bitten completely to the bone of her left arm. Blood spurted in terrible gouts from the wound. Their deep slashes across the ripe curves of her buttocks. He was picking up the crabs and hurling them further out to the sea, trying to make her way through the boiling mass of them back to shore. I tried to help her, smashing my bottle against the sun them and tossing them as far as I could, but it was hopeless. A naked man and a naked woman, armed only with a glass bottle between them, could not defend themselves against a seething ocean of monster crabs. Whoa, shit. I felt them nipping at my calves, my thighs, my loins. A crab was crawling up Pamela's body. She screamed as its pincers bit into the soft flesh of her breast. I beat my way to her and wrenched the hideous creature from her body. Blood poured from the wound. I had suffered a dozen bites by now by myself, turned them into a dozen pinpoints of blazing agony. I got my arm around Pamela's shoulders. She was sobbing hysterically, sliding and losing her footing, and hardly knew which way to turn. I guided her, dragged her actually, while desperately trying to clear a path through the thick maze of massive crabs with a bottle. I might have succeeded. We were only a dozen feet offshore, but suddenly Pamela, her bare body slippery from blood and salt water, eluded my grasp and slid beneath the surface of the water. Immediately a swarm of black shells made for her. I groped blindly, trying to draw her up, and as I reached for her, fierce pincers seized my wrist. The sharp grip tightened. I stared at my hand as though it were strangers, and knew oddly that I was going to lose it. But through a miracle I managed to pry the crab loose. My wrist was slashed to the bone, but I kept my hand. Pamela, I thought. Where is Pamela? Her wild thrashings had carried her 5 feet further out to sea. I could make out arms and legs thrusting above the water, and hundreds of blue-black crabs swarming around her. I waded toward her, caught by one arm and one leg, and dragged her bodily from the water. Crabs followed us, we made for shore, but only a few actually crawled out onto the sand. I got a good look at one, a repellent beast with busy little legs and 2 beady eyes flickering at me, and I pounded the life out of it with my bottle of rum. I fought back the temptation to collapse on the warm sand. I was completely exhausted, bleeding from 20 deep gashes. I had to look after Pamela, who was half drowned, whose body was mutilated by 100 horrible slashes. I knelt before her. She was a ghastly sight, lying face down in the sand, with great gaping rents in her golden brown flesh. The muscles of her back, whose play I had only admired only minutes before, and so terribly exposed to my sight where the skin had been ripped away. I rolled her over. One full breast had been sliced practically in half by a pincer. Her belly and thighs were dreadfully ripped apart. Blood seeped from the wounds into the sand, and I knew there'd be no help for her. I put my ear to her breast. There was no sound of a heartbeat. Whether she had drowned or died of blood loss, I had no way of knowing. Numb and shocked myself, I lifted her mutilated body and carried it back to the blanket. There I wrapped her in it. Then I dressed, though it was hell for me. I had 4 serious cuts and a host of minor ones. Somehow I got Pamela's body down to the motorboat and found my way back to Belize. There I staggered up onto the dock and called for help and toppled face forward, too weak to stay conscious any longer. The next few days were blurred in my memory. I was taken to the local hospital, and there my wounds were bound. I spent a few days in bed with a high fever. Pamela's father came in to visit, I told him the story as it had truthfully happened. Pamela had invited me into the inlet for the day. She had gone wading and somehow blundered into a nesting ground of giant Caribbean crabs, and they'd attacked her and cut her to pieces before I could save her. He seemed willing to believe that. He hardly appeared to care about his daughter's bloody fate. And I recovered from my experiences. I finished up my business in Belize and flew back to the States. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been able to go near salt water since, and I lay awake at night thinking of the long-lived redhead with a calendar girl body who gave herself to me one night in British Honduras and who met a death of unimaginable grisliness the next day. Yeah. Oh, hey, Rob. Welcome. Welcome to some of the weirder pulp stories. Someone like whoever wrote this very clearly had something they needed to get out of the system. There is one other one that I have for this. Yeah, it's trapping. Involving a horde of killer lemmings, but we can delve back to that later if you guys want. How can we forget such incredible titles as "A Nazi Spy Who Murdered for Fun," "Expose the Truth About Nymphomaniacs," "Curves the Italian Way." Like these are all very clearly made for lonely men in the 1950s. Like before internet porn was a thing. Anyways, we got some stuff over here. Or of course we got this fantastic issue. I have no idea what's in this, but honestly, the cover alone has sold me. Like it's a whale with legs. What more can I want? Also got a swamp girl of Venus over here. What'll tickle your fancy, lads? Gender dad a wrestling. I do not know. Also, I'm not sure if that's meant. I'm not sure if that's meant to be a dad or a giant, Rob. I mean, come on, it's the future. You don't want to show some tasteful titty? So yeah, we got whale with legs, swamp girl of Venus. Some of these lovely stories, and of course, the creeping horde of death. It's lemmings. It's just lemmings. Okay, so I guess so Rob was interested by the gender dad, and of course the big and got interested with the big whale. Yeah, fuck it. Let's see what this big doofus is. An easy way to get into electricity. Learn without books in 90 days. That sounds like a very bad idea. Let's see. In the realm of books, Secret Kingdom. Okay, I'm thinking it's probably gonna be either the Steam. Oh wait, hang on. In the next issue, under C2. So Secret Kingdom is definitely something about Incas. I'm guessing probably either Chain. And let me just see if I can find. Oh, and the cover. Okay, yeah, it's from the Steam God. That is page 640. And it starts. Okay, yeah. So from what I can see, it seems to be like the kind of one of the tradition of a thermally heated lost world in the Arctic, which was a fairly common phenomenon across a lot of pulp fiction. Honestly, I can see why, given that Iceland exists. Actually, hang on. Someone need to it's a thermally heated lost world with giant whales and steam. It's basically they find Iceland. Oh, the interior of the Earth is entirely in a state of almost white heat and we are protected by a thin crust of rock and soil. Sometimes Mother Earth breaks through this crust and we have volcanoes, hot springs, and geysers. Recently, the steam and boiling water from a geyser in Yellowstone National Park killed a tourist. Read the story of hot spring activities and see what happened to the hero. Ah, yeah, so from a person, a tourist. Because apparently it's like a regular thing from Yellowstone. Apparently it's just a regular thing in Yellowstone where people just try swimming in the thermal pools that will boil them alive. Okay, so let's see now. All right, audience, my audience of seven. Audience, all right, my seven chat. And let me just get some water first. We were members of the Kingsford Arctic Expedition. We were at an altitude of about 4,000 feet, flying due south, in every direction as far as we could see were the white wastes of the Arctic polar regions. Evidently, we were over thick glacier ice. There's a slight tinge of blue to the surface, except for long rifts of dazzling white marked extensive pressure ridges. As I swept the encircling landscape with my glass, I detected a long irregular streak of faint color away to the west. It was of an indefinite green tint. I wondered if it could be the outcropping of a mountain range. I wished we might turn aside to explore it, but I knew to do so was out of the question, for we had flown much farther afield than what our gas supply warranted. Led on by new and interesting sights that I believed no Arctic explorer had ever seen. It was imperative for safety's sake that we take the straightest and quickest route back to our base. We were still beyond the safe flying radius for planes of the type used by our expedition, and we knew that in case of a disaster to our machine there would be little if any chance of our being found and rescued. I pointed to the rift of color and passed my glass to Hadley, who was piloting the plane. At that moment a foreign sound mingled with the rhythmic hum of the engine, and instantly our whole attention was turned to the machine, for evidently something was the matter. The motor commenced to labor, and an unmistakable odor warned us that she was getting hot. Hadley cut off the spark and was tilted our course earthward. Oh, hey, Tote! I found a story about land whales I found a story about land whales in a thermally heated region in the Arctic, full of steam. Sounded like Iceland. So, as the resident Icelandic, I knew you would be interested. I pointed to the rift of color past my. In fact, you actually came in right in time. We're just starting in. At that moment, I pointed to the rift of color and passed my glass to Hadley, who was piloting the plane. At that moment a foreign sound mingled with the rhythmic hum of the engine, and instantly our whole attention was turned to the machine. Evidently something was the matter. Oh, wait, now. Hadley cut off the spark and tilted our course earthward. The motor was so hot that it refused to stop but throbbed on. As I reached to cut off the flow of gas, there was an explosion and a flash of flame. The machine was on fire and knew there was no time to lose. If I inserted a finger in the ring of my ready parachute, the flames roared past me. I closed my eyes and jumped. A few moments later, I was fairly launched on my way out to the ground in comparative safety. I looked about me and caught a glimpse of a flaming, smoking machine, far away and below me, catapulting to earth. I hoped my companion had been able to get clear, but I could see no other parachute, and my hopes died. I landed very safely in rough ice, and hastily gathering up my parachute, I hurried away to where a dark blotch marked the end of the descent of the plane. Everything combustible was burnt. The metal skeleton of the machine had struck the ice with terrific force, utterly demolishing it. In the midst of it all was the charred and mangled remains of poor Hadley. How long I stood there, dazed and stupefied, helplessly staring at this terrible sight, I do not know, but I was aroused by consciousness that I was very cold. I realized the function in such a climate, inaction in such a climate, in spite of my warm aviator's clothes, would very shortly end my career, so I decided to cover the wreck with my blue parachute in order to mark the place in the vast expanse of white, and venture forth in search of shelter. Hurriedly, and with stiff, numb hands, I fastened the cloth over the tangled mass as best I could, and turned away. I was sick with horror and half paralyzed with cold. I had no notion of where I was going. I ran, aimlessly, stumblingly, blunderingly over the ice. Presently, as my heart commenced to race and my circulation sped up, I felt more comfortable. My mind began to function more normally. I slowed my pace and tried to plan some course of action. Here I was, alone in the wastes of the Arctic, far north of the haunts of any living thing. No bird or animal, not even a fox, could support life in this eternal ice. Oh, yes, it's like foxes are like the Waffle House. They're like the Waffle Houses of the animal kingdom, and they can't if as long as there's possibility, they're open. There was no land, only endless snow and ice. All I had was a meager one-day emergency ration that all members of the expedition were required to carry on their persons when away from the base. I had my knife and watch and some matches. Yes, I now realized that I had thrust a telescope into my coat pocket also. I took it out and looked at it. Then I remembered for the first time the faraway streak of green. Here was a gleam of hope. Possibly it would prove a refuge. No doubt it was far off, but it would be better to be striving for a definite goal than to wander about aimlessly over the desert of snow and ice till certain death should overtake me. I made my way to the top of a neighboring pressure ridge and tried to get my bearings and clear up my sense of direction. As we were flying south when I saw the rift of color, and it appeared directly on my right, it must be to the west. I turned toward the southern sky. There was the sun showing dimly through the frosty air. I took out my watch and saw that it was 12:15. It meant the sun was nearly due south. And the minute hand of the watch should point west when I turned to the dial so as to make out the hour hand point to the sun. But how was I to keep a straight course? There's no sign of a landmark. The ice in every direction was as much of a sameness as the waves of the ocean. I was once again feeling the cold, so I decided to keep the sun on my left and trust to good luck. It didn't seem as though I'd be likely to miss the place so badly that I would be unable to pick it out with my glass. It seemed quite long, subtending on an angle of perhaps 5 degrees. I took one last look at the dark speck that marked the scene of the recent tragedy and pushed off. Now that I had a definite plan, I felt a little heartened. I picked up a fragment of ice and put it in my mouth to quench my growing thirst and tried to estimate how far away the green patch probably was. It had not been visible to the eye except through the glass, and since it was day of fair visibility, I judged that one could probably see probably 65 miles from that far height with the unaided eye. So it would not be reasonable to suppose the place is much less than that distance away. On the other hand, it might be considerably farther. Suppose I could travel 25 miles a day. It would take me nearly 3 days to reach it. It was a disheartening outlook. I had meager rations even for one day. I had no snowshoes. If I encountered soft snow, I could not hope to make progress. Fortunately, I had stout boots that could reasonably be expected to hold out as long as my strength would last. But would the sun continue to shine for 3 consecutive days? If its position should be obscured, I would have no guide. In that case, I knew that if I kept on, I should naturally travel in a wide circuit and be lost. Of course, the sun would not set in this high latitude at this season, and its course from east to west was so short that, knowing the time of day, I could easily gauge my course fairly well. It seemed that my only salvation lay in the chance that there would be no storm. All the late afternoon I trudged on. At 6 o'clock I halted and erected a slight windbreak with some broken chunks of ice. There I rested a while and ate sparely of my emergency ration. I decided if the low-lying sun furnished sufficient light, I would go out until midnight, and then if I could find any kind of shelter, I would lie down and sleep. So I wound my watch and started on. At about 1 o'clock I came upon some block ice, that is, ice that had been broken up into large, irregular chunks and piled haphazard. Among these chunks was loose snow. I sought out a place somewhat sheltered from the cold wind, made a little burrow in the snow, and lay down to sleep. I wondered if I would ever wake up, and if I did survive the night in the snow, wouldn't it be frozen in so hard around me I could never get out? I was so exhausted I soon fell asleep and slept soundly until 7 o'clock. To my great relief, I found upon waking, and I was neither dead nor frozen fast in the snow, but on standing up, I found I was stiff with the cold and every one of my muscles was sore. The good old sun, although dim, was still there. I ate the remainder of my emergency ration and started again for the west. My progress the next 2 days was painful and tedious, but not very eventful. I encountered a number of wide crevasses in the deep ice floe, and was obliged to make several long detours. By the end of the third day, I was weak from my long fast and exhausted by the constant exertion. I felt sure that, in spite of all detours and rough going, I must have traveled at least 60 miles, and I cannot imagine why I had not come within sight of my goal. If it was a range of mountains or an outcropping of light green rock, and I had been going the time to something like the right direction, I should be able to see it now, even without the glass. During the whole day and the preceding day, I had repeatedly taken the telescope from my inside pocket, where I now carried it to keep it free from frost. I scanned the entire horizon for signs of outcroppings, but it had been a fruitless search. There was absolutely nothing but limbless fields of ice and snow. Could it have been an optical illusion, or had I traveled in the wrong direction and so missed it? I wished that Hadley had seen it too, and would know there was really something there. I came upon some broken ice and snow, and as had served me the previous nights for a shelter, and made my usual preparations for sleep. I was so starved and utterly exhausted I felt the end was not far off. I wondered dimly if it would be better on the morrow to seek a somewhat sheltered place and await the inevitable and comparative comfort, or would it be better to keep on struggling to the bitter end? In the morning I woke still feeling very weak and disheartened. A little way off I saw a pressure ridge where the ice was heaved to quite a height. I made my way to the highest point and strained my eyes to scan the landscape. I could see nothing unusual. I adjusted the glass with trembling hands and examined the western horizon. No, there was nothing but ice. But wait, there was something! A bit of white mist, or the snow against the darker color of the glacial ice. My heart began to beat fast with excitement. The reason told me a wisp of fog. That, that wisp of fog, and a wisp of fog in the early morning was nothing to get excited about. So it was perhaps something more than a coincidence that I was localed in the very direction where I had hoped to find something unusual. Besides, it appeared too definitely localized to be the result of general weather conditions. I tucked the instrument under my clothes next to my body to warm it and make sure it was free from frost. Then I wiped off the lens and looked again. Yes, surely enough, it was something of an unfamiliar aspect. It could hardly be a snowbank because it was too billowy. It did not look like a cloud either. It must be either smoke or steam. I cannot imagine what could cause steam unless there might be open water here. I had often seen fog or steam rising over lakes and ponds in the early morning in temperate climates, but nothing short of a volcano would cause smoke in a country where there is no vegetation to burn, and volcanoes are only on mountain tops. Well, no matter what it was, I must reach it. I found myself under a strange hallucination. There were now two of us, one here on the ice ridge and the other over there a little way, asleep in the snow. I felt that I must hurry back and rouse him and tell him to take new heart and press on, for yonder was a hopeful sight. No, I reflected, it could not be, for I had had no companion on the march. Perhaps I was still asleep in the snow and only dreaming of a bank of mist. I had been standing still for some time in this exposed place. I knew I was wretchedly cold. I swung my arms frantically and ran down among the ice blocks to escape the cold wind. Gradually my thoughts cleared, my circulation increased. I knew I was alone, up and about. Moreover, I had no time to lose. I must go quickly, while my strength held out. I was terrified of this indication of the weakening of my mind. I ran up to the tip of the little rise and looked again. Yes, it was there. I see it dimly with the naked eye. I only hesitated to make sure of the direction and fix it in my mind, before I struck off as fast as I could go in my weakened condition. I didn't walk, I ran. I ran for what seemed a long time, and seemed to remember that I had left somebody back there asleep in the snow. Why had I done such a thing? Why had I not roused him and urged him to come with me? It was only a momentary thought, but instantly I recognized the old enemy. I must be overexerting myself. I was sapping my system of the little strength that still remained. I must slow up and conserve my vitality. I fell into a brisk walk. Soon I topped the little rise and saw again the bank of mist. This time it seemed a little closer. I hurried on. What if it should prove to be only open water when I arrive? Still, there would be the possibility of fish or some aquatic thing to be captured for food, and maybe driftwood or something to make a fire. I no longer had to look up for the sun to direct my course. From the top of every little ridge I could see this thing I was striving to reach, but I felt myself growing weaker. My feet were as heavy as lead, and I stumbled awkwardly whenever I encountered a rough spot. Yet I had no notion to give up the fight. There's in the cold countries an almost unbelievable vitality, an unquenchable instinct to live that does not exist anywhere elsewhere in the world. It is a matter of common knowledge to men who have lived in the far north that both men and animals will survive hardships and recover from injuries that unquestionably be fatal in any other climate. Perhaps this was this arctic will to live that kept me up. At any rate, I perceived at last that the mists were visible not only from the top of the ridges but from the level as well. It must be getting quite close. With renewed hope, I pressed on. I looked at my watch. It was noon. I had been on the way 5 hours. I took up the glass again and examined the mist. It was now clear that it was mist. I thought I could see it moving and changing in shape, and some of it seemed to be drifting away with the wind. Yes, and to the south of it there was now visible an expanse of glare ice. It must be fog of some sort, rising from I knew not what, but as it blew away and condensed, for it was falling in fine rain. Surely, I thought, there must be a great deal of warmth of some kind there, if nothing else, and I fought off the now almost overpowering feeling of weariness and tried to ignore the cutting cold of the fierce north wind. The last few miles of my journey I remember only very dimly. Once I wondered what time it was, but it seemed as though I had no watch. I left it behind with the man who was asleep back there in the snow. With an effort, I overcame the delusion and took out my watch. It was 2:30. I couldn't seem to get it back in my pocket. I let it hang by a short leather guard. At last I encountered a steep upgrade, and the rising mists were close at hand. I dropped to my knees and pulled myself along with my hands. My arms seemed much stronger than my legs. I struggled onto the top. Was this a mountain? Could it be a volcano? I stood up and peered over the crest of the rise. A wholly unexpected sight met my astonished eyes, and a breath of warm wind filled my nostrils. There before me lay a narrow green valley, with white steam rising from 1,000 places. I stood transfixed. I could hardly believe my senses. Could it be that this was a dream, a vision? I had heard that people dying in the desert saw visions most inviting. I almost suspected that the whole last day's trek was only visionary, and I was actually laying in the snow, way back where I thought I had dug in for the night, about to stare into the great unknown. I pulled myself together with a feeling of impatience and started along the slippery way to look for a place where it would be possible to descend. One of my feet slipped and I fell. I felt the impact of the hard ice. I was conscious of a swift, gliding motion, like a toboggan on an icy slide. It must have been several hours later that I regained consciousness. I opened my eyes and looked about me. It was very nearly dark. The Arctic sun must have sunk to a very low level, possibly as low as it ever does in the season of the midnight sun. I knew I must be down in the deep gulch, because it was warm, blissfully warm. I felt no pain, but I was very tired, so I turned over on my left side and went to sleep. And when I awoke, it was 10 o'clock and much lighter. I got up and found that I had been lying on a low ledge of rock, which was but partially covered with loose soil. A few feet away was a crack in the rock, and out of it came hissing a number of little jets of steam. Looking up, I saw the great white steam cloud obscured the whole sky. I congratulated myself on still being alive, and cast about in quest of food. I was ravenously hungry. There was vegetation all about me, but it was very pale, having the light green color peculiar to plants grown in cellars and dark places. The west side of the valley was very steep, almost a sheer cliff, and the entire wall was covered with clinging vines that almost hid the face of the rock and continued to the very top of the wall. The east side was not so steep, and the snow and ice found lodgment between rocky outcroppings and extended in places well down into the valley. It was at such a place, fortunately, that I lost my footing when sliding down. At this point the valley was only a few rods wide. I cannot see how long it was on account of the steam. Obstructing my vision, but because of the size of the cloud I had seen, I knew this valley, or others like it, must be quite extensive. A little stream of clear water trickled down the hill and disappeared into a crevice in the rocks. I lay down and drank deeply. This was the first real water I had seen for a long time. I now started along the bottom of the valley, and soon came to where the sun appeared over the top of the high bank and flooded everything with a pale, sickly glow. I wondered how any vegetation could grow with so little light. It was, however, plain to be seen that there was no lack of heat. By this time I was carrying my coat on my arm. I scanned the pale but abundant vegetation for anything edible, and soon found a few low bushes with buds that looked something like pussy willows. I picked some and ate them. I found them to be quite palatable. A little further on I came upon some wild leeks growing in a jutting rock. The soil was thin, and I had no trouble in pulling them up. They proved to be mild, and I ate quite a quantity of them. I searched along the valley for quite a distance without finding anything that looked at all fit to eat. Steam was jetting from cracks and holes in the ground all about me. I had to be careful not to burn myself. I was about to retrace my steps and turn back and retrace my steps to where I had found the leaks, then when I came upon a seemingly different sort of soil, covering the whole bottom of the gorge. Thinking the soil might rise to a different kind of vegetation, I continued a little further, and was soon rewarded by finding a thick growth of mushrooms. I saw at once they were of an edible variety. And I also saw this was a terrible idea. You do not eat mushrooms. Rule 1 of the woods. Don't eat shit you don't recognize immediately. So I gathered a quantity of them and ate them raw. They tasted far different from cooked mushrooms, and by no strength of the imagination could I call them good. But I knew they were wholesome and filling. I was in no position to be finicky. After I had eaten my fill, I cast down to rest on a little ledge of rock near an impossibly noisy jet of steam. I gave myself up to the consideration of my strange situation. In the first place, after giving the matter some thought, I realized it was not a very uncommon occurrence for natural steam to issue from the earth in quite large quantities. I knew the location of several valleys in widely separated parts of the world that contained these so-called fumaroles or steam jets. It so happened that only the year before I had joined the expedition, my brother, who was an engineer, had been preparing an article on power available from natural steam, and not being busy at the time, I had been drafted to do part of his research work. In this way, I come upon some quite striking facts. At Healdsburg Valley in California, not far from San Francisco, there are a number of fumaroles where very hot steam pours out, and recently a number of deep wells have been drilled nearby with gratifying results. In some of these wells, 12 inches in diameter, a pressure of over 3,000 pounds has been developed, enough steam to drive tremendously heavy turbines and furnish almost unlimited heat and power. The noise of escaping steam in one of these wells is so terrible that workmen and others are obliged to stop their ears with cotton before approaching it. In the Yellowstone National Park, there are great numbers of geysers and fumaroles where hot steam is liberated. In one locality, the shriek of escaping steam can be heard for miles. And far off New Zealand, there's a tract of thousands of square miles, more or less thickly covered with active fumaroles and hot springs. At Latorello, Italy, southwest of Florence, steam piped from a number of wells used to operate a great factory. Numerous other wells within a radius of 80 miles of this mill are utilized for industrial purposes. It is estimated that this steam comes from a region where the temperature is 3,200 degrees Fahrenheit. In Italy alone, it has been developed 3.5 million horsepower from natural steam. A great deal more is available. In the city of Beppu, on an island of Japan, natural steam is harnessed to drive a steam engine, operate a turbine, and an electric generator. Okay, so in other words, okay, as someone someone who dabbles in writing, the author absolutely took a lot, wanted to make sure because the time he took researching this didn't go in vain. Like I know someone's hyperfixation when I see one. Although I was entirely familiar with these facts, I never thought before of the possibility of a fumarole valley in the land of eternal snow. Except, of course, the entire country of Iceland, of course, had not been discovered yet. Since the eternal heat of the earth could be but little affected by surface weather, and since the heat of all fumaroles comes from the intense heat of the great magma, or molten mass of this remote interior of the earth, there seemed no logical reason for being surprised at finding a steam heat valley at this latitude. And now it occurred to me why I'd seen the valley as a green patch from the air, but only as a cloud of mist from the surface of the ice world. From the air I was able to see down into the valley and capture a glimpse of the green foliage, contrasting with the surrounding blue-white of the snow. However, none of this greenness was to be seen from the ground, and had it not been for the steam cloud, I never would have mustered strength to travel so far. I felt a great sense of relief at having escaped from the snowfields, and the full meal I had eaten gave me such a sense of well-being that I felt little concern about how I was to make my way back to civilization. That was to come later. Soon the soft, milk-filtered rays of the sun, combined with the warmth given off by the steam, made me drowsy, so I removed my boots in order to use them for a pillow, and composed myself for another comfortable sleep. It was 8 o'clock next morning when I woke from a long, refreshing slumber. The sun was not high enough to show above the rim of ice, and the whole valley was shrouded in deep gloom. While I waited for more light with which to explore the valley and forage for food, I meditated on the possibility of developing power from all this escaping steam. I thought of what use could power be in such a place? I had no idea until later. Finally, as the sun rose high enough to percolate into the depths of the gorge, after eating a few more of the mushrooms, I continued my tour of exploration. I had only progressed a little way when I found the valley was growing smaller, and presently it narrowed to a mere canyon. Evidently it was coming to an end. I was quite surprised at this, because I had judged from what was apparent from the air and from the steam cloud that must be several miles in extent. I had encountered near the other end of it, and entered near the other end of it, and thus far I had not traversed over a mile and a half of its extent. As walls closed nearer together and became more precipitous, I approached a steam vent somewhat larger and noisier than any I had yet encountered. The escaping steam made a sort of high-pitched, angry whine that was striking like a protesting human voice. It was an unpleasant sound, and it rose and fell with a vibrating rhythm that was quite disconcerting. At this point, the wall on my left was quite perpendicular, but the one on the right was somewhat sloping, although not very steep. The bottom of the valley was no more than a dozen feet wide. To my surprise, I found the surface so hot when I approached the fumarole that I was obliged to turn back. I first seemed to not be able to go any further in that direction, but on examining the slanting right bank, I discovered a narrow path that led up and beyond this heated area. This discovery was something of a surprise for me, for hereafter I had seen no signs of animal or human life. To be sure, the track was dark, dim, and indistinct, might possibly mark a rift in the underlying rock, or some old-time watercourse. I examined it for tracks. There were none discernible. I followed the course up on the steep incline, passing the steam jet rather fearfully, thinking what an unpleasant experience it would be if I should miss my footing and step into it. As I had more than half expected the path, if I could call it that, descended again to the canyon floor, and after looking carefully for other signs of light, I continued on my way. And now the gap commenced to widen, and I saw ahead of me a curve in the walls. As I rounded this curve, I saw a glimpse of receding hillsides and the beast of a long, widening valley. I hastened forward eagerly, coming suddenly upon a little puddle of mud, and while watching to make sure of my own footing, I noticed a track beside a flat stone. It was evidently a fresh track. I paused to examine it. It appeared to be the imprint of 4 or 5 large toes. I could not make sure which, and because of the softness of the mud, I made out the ball of a wide foot. The track was so close to the stone I suspected a part of the great foot might have rested on it, with only the forward portion stuck in the ooze. It might be the track of a bear, of some of the great cat family, or even of a giant human being. Whatever it was, it must be of awe-inspiring size. I glanced fearfully about, but there was no living thing in sight. I hurried on toward the wider valley. Suddenly, as I rounded the boulder, I came face to face with 2 giant men. The worst enemy of every Arctic explorer. Large men. They were such extraordinary size, and their appearance was so unexpected that I stopped dead in my tracks. The first impulse was to turn and run back into the narrow canyon. I saw one of the men carry something, like a long weapon. I was not sure there might not be some kind of gun with which to shoot me if I tried to escape. On second thought, I decided the wisest course would be to make no resistance and trust to their friendly instincts to preserve me. I had no weapon aside from my long hunting knife, and besides I was a mere infant in size compared with them. So I stood watching their approach with as much calmness as I could muster. Evidently the spirit of the chase was upon them. Without slackening their grip, they pounced upon me, burying me in a heap to the ground. For a moment, they held me fast, face downward, and I heard one of them speak. He was evidently convinced there was no need of such drastic measures, and his tone was manifestly one of expostulation. His point of view was apparently prevailed, for I was grasped by the shoulders and raised to my feet. And now, while they examined me and commented in a strange language, I had an opportunity to observe them more in detail. The most striking thing about them was their extraordinary size. I judged them they were at least 10 feet tall and large in proportion. Their skins were very light. In fact, they showed an unnatural pallor, one who has lived too much indoors. They both had flaming red hair. They did not appear to be savages. I noticed their faces were shaven. Their hair was neatly trimmed, and their meager clothing revealed none of the crudeness of barbarism. They were very scantily dressed, each having but a single garment, short trunk-like trousers extending halfway to the knee, continued at the top and tapered to form a wide band that passed over the right shoulder. This was held from slipping off by a narrow strip above the chest, or on the chest just below the arms. Aside from the unhealthy pallor, both appeared to be in robust condition. One of them continued to grasp me firmly by the upper arm, but the great hand seemed to take up the greater part, and it seemed to take up the greater part of the space from the shoulder to the elbow. I suppose I presented a very grotesque appearance, with several days' growth of beard in my face and heavy winter clothing, sadly disheveled from my recent vicissitudes. Animate. I noticed with some feeling of reassurance my captors were now grinning rather broadly as they discussed me with great, heavy voices that seemed well in keeping with their huge size. I now saw that what at first appeared to be weapons were only a very long and shiny sort of horn or trumpet. One of them addressed a question to me. Hang on a minute. Hang on, just need to check one thing. Yeah, I think I might need to call it here. My folks are getting rather anxious. Let's see. Should I? I'm not sure if I can keep the stream open and for very long. Hmm. I'm not sure if I can really get away with it having it doing nothing. Okay, I guess I'll have to call it here if we can start again. Guess tomorrow. But because I have a day off tomorrow, I can probably get started then. I guess I can get started around the same time then. So, all right, I'll see you all. Thank you all so much for coming to this. Take care.